Car bomb kills at least 5 people in Somalia's capital. DRC opposition calls for calm amid tensions of a vote delay. And UN condemns assault and detention of the ceasefire monitoring team in South Sudan. Hello and a warm welcome to Africa Live. I am Peninah Karibe. Let's have a look at other stories coming up this hour. The South African brand in mild gains as 2018 draws to a close. And another star performance for Mohamed Salah as Liverpool notch up 7th straight win. We begin in Somalia, where police say a suicide car bombing near the presidential palace has killed at least 6 people and wounded several others. Colonel Ahmed Mohamud says those killed in the Saturday morning blast include soldiers and civilians. He says the bomber targeted a military checkpoint near the rear entrance of the heavily fortified palace. Police say lawmakers and other officials had been traveling nearby on what is a business day in the Horn of Africa nation. A second blast was heard shortly afterwards nearby in Mogadishu. There was no immediate claim of responsibility for the blast. For more on this, we're joined by CGTN's Abdulaziz Bilu live for us in Mogadishu. Abdul, give us more details on this blast.
Well, Peninah, the blast happened at around 9 a.m. in the morning, and it's actually a time when most government workers are headed towards their workplaces. The area itself that the suicide bomber targeted was the security checkpoint that leads to the main entrance to the National Theatre, and in its vicinity we have different government ministries as well as several media institutions that have offices rather in that area. So it was quite a very busy area at that given time where the suicide bomber targeted, and it's the checkpoint that leads to the National Theatre. It's very heavily guarded by government forces. So how the bomber managed to reach that exact spot despite all the security checkpoints and detonate the vehicle there remains a mystery as of yet, and that's one thing that investigators here from the police are trying to investigate. There are different military checkpoints, more than 4 of them before you reach the National Theatre, and that area is impossible for normal normal civilians to access with their private vehicles. So it remains a big issue of concern there. But then again, it's a deadly blast followed by a second deadly explosion, and it killed more than 7 people, as you've mentioned, Peninah.
And Abdul, there's been yet no claim of responsibility for the attack, but we know that Al-Shabaab extremist group often targets the capital. Has there been any word from officials?
Well, officials as of yet, they're trying to investigate how that vehicle itself reached that area before it detonated. But shortly before we came to this live bulletin, media propaganda for Al-Shabaab media outlets, they were relaying different kinds of information saying that the militant group has claimed responsibility for that attack because it targeted a security checkpoint. So they're saying that their target was that security checkpoint where government forces are. But then again, it's not just the security forces who came and attacked. We have also different people, civilians, including a journalist and 3 other employees working for a local Somali TV station known as Universal, who all died in this attack. So the militant group Al-Shabaab is saying that its target was security forces, government security forces who are manning that exact checkpoint at that given time. But from what we understand is that only several security forces died in that attack, but the majority of those who were killed was civilians, and it's an issue that's still under investigation, Peninah.
And this attack comes barely a week after U.S. airstrikes reportedly killed 62 Al-Shabaab militants. It seems the attacks are doing little to deter the militants, Abdul.
Well, you're right. The pressure is being felt by the militant group, especially in areas outside Mogadishu. We understand that most of these drones are targeting the militants not in the city, not anywhere near the city, but in far and remote areas in central Somalia, in a town known as Haradere, and in southern Somalia here, quite far area near Kismayo. But time and again, Al-Shabaab always manages to carry out deadly bombings here in Mogadishu. And one thing that analysts here are attributing is the reason is that Al-Shabaab, despite losing like 60 militants in the past 1 month alone, according to the U.S. Africa Command, experts are saying saying that the attacks here in Mogadishu is a reminder that the group is still a threat, still a lethal threat, using attacks here in Mogadishu just to show that it's a formidable force and that it can strike at will here, despite security assurances from AFRICOM that they have degraded the capability of Al-Shabaab and AMISOM and the Somali government. So we can say that the pressure is being felt, but they're trying to counter that pressure using attacks here in the city, Peninah.
All right, Abdul, thank you very much for that update. Abdulaziz Bilu live for us there in Mogadishu. Let's stay in Somalia, and weeks of political tension in the country could come to an end after lawmakers failed to impeach the Somali president. Opposition MPs failed to meet the required threshold, forcing the speaker to throw out the impeachment motion. From Mogadishu, CGTN's Abdulaziz Bilu reports.
A move to impeach the Somali president suffered a major blow on Thursday after a motion of no confidence to impeach President Mohamed Abdullahi Farmajo lacked enough support among legislators. 92 lawmakers will have to support the motion for it to have been submitted to the Speaker, according to the country's draft constitution. The latest announcement is now expected to end weeks of tension between the president and lawmakers who elected him last year.
The lack of a constitutional court is partly to blame for the political crisis. A court of law is supposed to judge the legality of the motion of impeachment. In this case, it's MPs who have the final say, but it's important that the issue was solved through dialogue, which is good for Somalia.
MPs accuse the president of signing secret deals with neighboring Ethiopia and Eritrea. The three countries recently signed a tripartite agreement to promote regional peace and security. The signing of the tripartite agreement between Mogadishu, Asmara and Addis Ababa has angered opposition lawmakers here in the country. Initially, the Speaker of the House of Parliament announced that the motion to impeach the president was valid after it received 92 signatures. But it has now emerged that 14 lawmakers never signed the paper, forcing the Speaker to shelve the motion. The political fallout over the impeachment motion saw the Speaker move from his official residence to a city hotel after accusing the president of blocking lawmakers from accessing his home. Experts say that political dispute is not a new thing in Somali politics, but not all have the interest of the nation at heart. Last year, members of parliament forced the former House Speaker Mohamed Usman Jawari to resign ahead of a no-confidence vote.
Motion to impeach government officials are as a sort of political enmity. Not all of them are based on the national interest of the state. What Somalia needs now is political stability. Leaders must respect the constitution and the rule of law.
Nearly halfway through his presidency, this is the second major political crisis to rock President Farmajo's government following Jawari's resignation last year. Experts now warn leaders against bickering and have urged them to complete the remaining task ahead before the end of the term, among them securing the country, strengthening the country's security forces, finally.
The Democratic Republic of Congo's opposition candidate Felix Tshisekedi has urged his supporters to remain calm and wait for the 30th of December to cast their votes. His call comes a day after the Electoral Commission announced the postponement of the elections that were initially slated for the 23rd of December. CGTN's Chris Ochamringa has more.
The news about the postponement of the elections in the DRC has upset many people in the capital, Kinshasa. On Thursday, the head of the Electoral Commission, Corneille Nangaa, said the polls will be pushed to the 30th of December from the original date of the 23rd. Mr. Nangaa cited the destruction of voting machines in a fire last week as the reason for the postponement. There have been fears of an outbreak of violence following the change in the voting date. But a leading opposition candidate, Felix Tshisekedi, has called on his supporters to remain calm.
I'm requesting you to be calm. Let's wait for the 30th of December and vote to change the government. Don't lose focus of our mission. The government wants us to protest so they can cancel the election.
The elections have been delayed for 2 years after President Kabila's term expired in 2016. The president invoked a clause in the constitution to remain in power. He handpicked former Interior Minister Emmanuel Ramazani Shadari to succeed him. Thousands of Congolese are eager to vote in the elections that will be the country's first peaceful transfer of power. Chris Ochamringa, CGTN, Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of Congo.
Meanwhile, scores of people in the Democratic Republic of Congo have expressed anger about the postponement of elections by the Electoral Commission.
We will invoke Article 64 of our Constitution, which grants us the right to defeat any individual who wants to seize power by force.
They waited for 3 days to the elections to announce the postponement. That's unheard of. It's a big shame to our country.
First of all, you heard that there was a storage place belonging to Seni which were burned. They claimed that they had almost 8,000 voting machines which were destroyed. So I don't see how they can replace all those machines overnight.
The Uganda government has stepped up measures to prevent the spread of the deadly Ebola virus ahead of DR Congo elections. The World Health Organization says inadequate engagement from communities and conflict continues to hamper Ebola response activities in the eastern DRC. Ugandan health officials are worried that the likely increase in the movement of people fearing the post-election violence may result in the spread of Ebola to the country. Michael Baleke has that report.
The border between Uganda and the DR Congo remains open, and health officials here say more than 20,000 people cross the border every week, putting the country at high risk of the deadly Ebola virus. Uganda is now putting in place preventive measures to ensure that all people crossing into the country in the event of a political unrest after the polls are screened and safe of the Ebola disease. Health officials say more walk-through screens and thermometers have been provided at all border crossings in western Uganda. Uganda has also deployed an experimental Ebola vaccine for health care and frontline workers along the border. While no Ebola cases have been detected in Uganda, it can take up to 3 weeks for symptoms to appear. The Ebola virus causes a severe hemorrhagic fever that kills at least half of the people who become infected. According to latest figures from the World Health Organization, the Ebola virus has infected more than 500 and killed over 300 in the eastern DR Congo. Since August 2018, the World Health Organization says efforts have been doubled ahead of the December 30th polls to prevent the spread of the highly contagious disease. Michael Baleke, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
The United Nations peacekeeping mission in South Sudan has condemned the recent assault and detention of the ceasefire monitoring team earlier this week. South Sudan's National Security Service reportedly forced several officials assessing the country's new peace deal to strip and subjected them to inhumane treatment.
The mission notes that the monitoring and verification team members and their support personnel were merely discharging their mandate in support of the revitalized agreement on the resolution of the conflict in the Republic of South Sudan. The mission urges the immediate commencement of investigations in order for the perpetrators to be held to account. The mission also urges the parties to revitalize the agreement to adhere to the commitments outlined in the agreement and to ensure that all their forces are aware and comply with the tenets of the agreement.
Moroccan police have arrested 3 people in connection with the killing of 2 female tourists from Norway and Denmark in a suspected militant attack in the Atlas Mountains. The bodies of the victims were found in an isolated area near Imlil on the way to Toubkal, North Africa's highest peak. Moroccan authorities say they have arrested a suspect in the tourist hub of Marrakesh. The suspect is allegedly a member of a militant group.
At this moment, the 4 suspects are undergoing a judicial hearing under the supervision of a general attorney to find out the circumstances of this criminal act and to discover the background and real motives behind perpetrating it, and also to examine the terrorist motive of this crime that is supported by the evidence and proof revealed by the inquiry.
You're watching Africa Live. Let's take our first break this hour coming up. The UN warns delayed polls in Guinea Bissau could result in a political crisis. And Tunisia seeks solutions to deal with the migrant situation in the country.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice. My home country lies at the foot of Africa, the southernmost tip of our beautiful continent, and the unique point at which two great oceans meet. Now on a clear day in Cape Town, you can just make out Robben Island, the place where Nelson Mandela was jailed for so long. South Africa has changed so much in the years since then, but it is this country's history that shaped me and took me into reporting. I'm inspired by Africa's men and women of courage. It's the everyday hero who brings out my passion. The creatives, the decision makers, the risk takers who are shaping a bright African future. I see them in Cape Town. I see them in the pulsating city of Johannesburg. I see them across the continent, and I know our time has come.
CGTN is a platform where African voices can speak for themselves and take their stories to the world. My name is Lindy Mtongana, and I'm a news anchor and reporter for CGTN.
The United Nations has warned delayed elections in Guinea Bissau is setting the country up for another political crisis. The Assistant Secretary General for Political Affairs, Taibrook Zerihun, briefed the UN Security Council saying decisive steps needed to be taken. Meanwhile, the chair of the UN body that oversees the country is asking the international community to consider giving the government emergency financial support. CGTN's Nick Harper reports from New York.
On the surface, the last 6 months has seen great change in Guinea Bissau. A new Prime Minister has been installed and there's been the formation of a new inclusive government. But the United Nations Assistant Secretary General for Political Affairs, Taibrook Zerihun, said authorities must now meet the new legislative election date on March the 10th. That's 4 months after it was originally scheduled. Zerihun warned that not to do so would risk lurching towards another political crisis. He said the international community should now consider sending a strong message to the country's government and authorities that credible elections were now needed, and needed without delay. The West African country has a history of political instability, and as Mauro Vieira, the chair of the Guinea-Bissau configuration of the UN Peacebuilding Commission, told the UN Security Council, its economic situation remains strained. Vieira urged UN members to look at providing emergency and targeted budget support to try and stabilise the public sector. The World Bank predicts economic growth in the country will fall more than 2% this year, down from 5.9% in 2017 to 3.8% this year. Nick Harper, CGTN, New York.
The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the Ministry of Social Affairs in Tunisia, and civil society organizations have conducted a study which made it possible to define the characteristics of the migration crisis. Experts have presented precise indicators. The project helps to think about concrete solutions to the problems of migration. CGTN's Adner Shawashi has that story from Tunis.
The results of a study entitled Talent Abroad, a review of Tunisian immigrants in countries of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, conducted by the organization in partnership with the authorities and the civil society, were presented in Tunis.
This study provides accurate and up-to-date statistics on the Tunisian diaspora. The statistics will help to develop an important database in Tunisia to define plans and policies on migration.
According to the Ministry of Social Affairs, a national migration strategy has already been put in place. It is based on 5 axes.
Its objectives include preserving the rights of the Tunisian diaspora, facilitating their mobility, establishing a comprehensive and balanced approach, and dealing with irregular migration. The adequacy and complementarity between this study and the national migration strategy is important.
Olivier Poivre-d'Arvor, ambassador of France to Tunisia, said this study helps to understand the phenomenon of migration, its historical origins, and the current situation.
More than 80% of Tunisian immigrants live in European Union countries, including 60% in France. The Tunisian diaspora has an important place in host countries. The study can also guide current projects on migration and strengthen action on the issue.
The number of Tunisian immigrants living in OECD countries is 630,000, with significant changes in the composition of the diaspora. More women are leaving the North African state to live in the EU.
According to the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the number of Tunisian women immigrants with a high level of education has more than doubled since 2000. However, the majority of Tunisian immigrants still have a low level of education. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
Nigeria has the highest number of children out of school in the world. That is according to the UN Children Agency UNICEF, whose recent survey revealed a staggering 13.2 million children have dropped out of school.
37-year-old Halima Salihu and her 3 children reside in Bwari, a local community 2 hours from the capital Abuja. They fled their home in Bama, a rural town in the northeast, after it was captured by Boko Haram back in 2014. Halima's husband was killed during the attacks, and now she struggles to raise her 3 children as a single mother. The cost of living in Abuja is high, and jobs are hard to come by. Quite often, the whole family have had to take up casual jobs in the community to be able to feed themselves. Ever since they moved here, life has been a gamble and education a luxury she cannot afford.
They will just be roaming about with all these children, and from there they will be copying bad characters. So I now say instead of that, for them to spoil, it's better they should go. I now went and explained myself to the principal of the school. He now said to let them be coming. Then, but let me find way to do and come and pay for their registration and school fees and other things. I now said to even the ones in primary, the small one is in primary 1. Then the second one is in primary 4.
Halima's children are part of millions of children who've had to drop out of school in Nigeria. Poverty is one of the main causes, but insecurity, negative traditional beliefs, and low investment in education are also blamed for the high number of children out of school. The latest survey conducted by the UN and Nigeria puts the number of school dropouts above 13 million children. Most of them are in the northeast, where Boko Haram has waged a rebellion for the past 9 years. The insurgents are violently opposed to formal education. Throughout the 9 years, they murdered thousands of teachers, destroyed schools, and made it impossible for millions of children to access schools.
We need to tackle the major reason for the existence of the dropout, which is the insecurity that we have in the country, because that has actually accumulated or increased the number of dropouts that we have in the northern region. If not for the insecurities, I don't think we would have had such an increment of 3 million. You understand? Because of the insecurity, we've had a lot of internally displaced people. People have run away from their places, and we have them in camps. And in these places, education is not available because they are actually struggling to eat. So where do they go to study?
Besides dealing with insecurity, poverty, and cultural attitudes to education, Nigeria's government is also being urged to significantly increase budgetary allocation to education. Currently, only 7% of the total budget goes to financing education, far below the 26% recommended by the UN. Next year's budget proposal, presented on Wednesday by President Buhari, for the first time made a generous allocation of $1.2 billion compared to nearly $300 million allocated in the 2018 budget proposal. Kelechi Amekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
To South Africa, where the peak holiday season is in full swing, especially in Cape Town, where the city is enjoying its first post-day zero festive period when water was expected to run out through the city. The drought has had a negative effect on the Western Cape's tourism sector after international inbound numbers decreased to just 3.7% in the fourth quarter of 2017 due to the impact of the water crisis. However, Cape Town residents have something to smile about as water restrictions have eased significantly. CGTN's Trevor Andrews has this report.
The visitors have arrived, and that means Cape Town's beaches, hotels and restaurants are filling up, which is always good news for the city's tourism industry. Business seems to be good, which is a welcome relief from the pressure associated with the drought, which made the last 3 years a nightmare for every Cape Townian, as well as the tourism sector. But authorities are bullish that the tide is turning, and this year will once again prove to be a bumper holiday season.
I think what's good is that we're seeing signs that the national government is releasing or getting rid of some of the visa regulations, the onerous visa regulations that have actually impacted on tourism first and foremost before the water did. I think that the hotels have done very, very well at creating alternative means of water through their desalination plants. So I certainly think that the tourism sector is ready to receive a far greater number of tourists going forward.
Last year, over 10.2 million foreign visitors arrived in the country, with more than 1.2 million of them making their way down to these shores, spending over $1.5 billion in the process. That means business for Lishle Mananga, a city mime artist who entertains locals and tourists for a small donation. He believes this summer could prove especially fruitful.
It's December, so the drought is there either way, but now it's better because now people are on holidays. We saw a clear even to this drought, but it's not like winter. You know, winter when you do this business, it's raining, there are no people, you see. People are indoors, drinking hot stuff, soup, coffee, stuff like that. But now it's better, but even though there's still drought.
But he is one of many that trade in the informal tourism market and have to work in concert with a much broader mainstream tourism market. Both though are equally as important in luring in foreign spend. It's not just international visitors that are getting the Western Cape's tourism sector back on its feet. That's because domestic tourism is not as seasonal as international inbound tourism and plays a vital role in sustaining livelihoods of many involved, especially at key tourism attractions.
Yeah, I think more tourists should come because they run business here. They are running according to running business. They are saving money. People like us are getting jobs and so on.
For now, the sunshine and white sandy beaches can be enjoyed by those lucky enough to spend this Christmas in the mother city, where local hospitality, a myriad of cultures and traditional cuisines await them all. Trevor Andrews, CGTN, Cape Town.
A look at our top stories. This Somali police say a suicide car bombing near the presidential palace has killed at least 6 people and wounded several others. Colonel Ahmed Mohamud says those killed in the Saturday morning blast include soldiers and civilians. He says the bomber targeted a military checkpoint near the rear entrance of the heavily fortified palace. Police say lawmakers and other officials had been traveling nearby on what is a business day in the Horn of Africa nation. A second blast was heard shortly afterwards nearby in Mogadishu. The Democratic Republic of Congo's opposition candidate Felix Tshisekedi has urged his supporters to remain calm and wait for the 30th of December to cast their votes. His call came a day after the Electoral Commission announced the postponement of the elections that were initially slated for the 23rd of December. Scores of people in the country have expressed anger about the postponement of elections by the Electoral Commission. The Uganda government has stepped up measures to prevent the spread of the deadly Ebola virus ahead of DR Congo elections. The World Health Organization says inadequate engagement from communities and conflict continues to hamper Ebola response activities in the eastern DRC. Ugandan health officials are worried that the likely increase in the movement of people fearing the post-election violence may result in the spread of Ebola to the country. And Moroccan police have arrested 3 people in connection with the killing of 2 female tourists from Norway and Denmark in a suspected militant attack in the Atlas Mountains. The bodies of the victims were found in an isolated area near Imlil on the way to Tukbal, North Africa's highest peak. Moroccan authorities say they have arrested a suspect in the tourist hub of Marrakesh. The suspect is allegedly a member of a militant group. And that's a wrap of our top stories this hour. Coming up in business news, the South African brand in mild gains as 2018 draws to a close. And the Kenyan entrepreneur who's found her sweet spot in the heart of London.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
The South African rand has gained some ground against the dollar as 2018 draws to a close. It's been a volatile year for the currency, losing more than 14% against the dollar. South African stocks have also been caught in the emerging markets onslaught, with investors turning to more developed economies. CGTN's Sumitra Naidu reports.
The rand was amongst the worst performers in 2018, losing 14.5% of its value against the US dollar. Domestic issues around land expropriation and nationalization of the South African Reserve Bank weighed on sentiment. Rising oil prices and tensions between the US and China added to that pressure.
The rand is also the 16th most heavily traded currency, so also it is used as a proxy for emerging market currency. So with the deep financial liquidity we have, we're driven 2/3 by global factors and 1/3 by local factors.
Slowing global growth and political tensions are causing headwinds for emerging markets. While domestic politics in South Africa are showing improvement, investors are concerned about the poor condition of state institutions.
The problems that Eskom presents for the economy are enormous. Not only does it have the ability of potentially taking us back into recession, because if there is no energy, people can't run their factories, run their offices, etc. That impacts overall economic output. Okay, but it also has the very real potential of impacting the fiscal position of the country.
But the US-China trade spat and Brexit have become the main catalysts. The impact was clearly evident on Africa's largest stock market. The JSE suffered its worst performance in a decade, losing 16% in 2018.
Global emerging market risk-off position had a big impact on us as well. It has been a tricky year for all investors. It's been a tricky year for all South Africans. But it is important that we recognize that there are things we can do to make a difference as a country, as individuals, as companies, and we need to do that. We can't just rely on the global environment to turn in our direction or to move back towards emerging markets.
We've seen the rand weaken, provide negative returns of around 8.5%, and this has filtered through into the bond market, unfortunately, as well, where we've seen foreigners sell about 51 billion worth of local bonds.
It was a particularly rough year for the JSE in 2018, but analysts are expecting a better 2019. This sell-off presents some really good buying opportunities, and no doubt investors will be looking to pick up some bargains. Sumitra Nadu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
The United Nations Economic Commission for Africa and the European Union have signed a $3.4 million agreement in support of the Continental Free Trade Area. Under the terms of the deal, an African Trade Observatory will also be set up. The deal was signed by the ECA Executive Secretary Vera Songwe and the EU Commissioner for International Cooperation and Development Niven Mimika. The EU has been supporting the AFCFTA negotiation process since its inception. Right, the Gatwick drone incident this week has raised various questions. What if this happened here in Africa? How would the authorities respond, and what are the ground rules on UAVs? We'll look at the regulations on that in Egypt. Here's Yasser Hakim with his summary.
To fly a UAV requires a special license, but obtaining this license is near impossible in Egypt for individuals and companies. Drones were used by the outlawed Muslim Brotherhood and other terrorist groups to locate and attack police forces after the 2011 uprising. Therefore, operating drones is only restricted to 2 or 3 companies that have a strong link to the security apparatus in Egypt. Flying a drone or bringing it into the country without an Egyptian license could get you a jail sentence and a hefty fine. Individual use is prohibited, and companies that want to use the drone for the entertainment industry, such as movies and adverts, need to rent them from the licensed companies and under strict surveillance from the security personnel. Yes, Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
As home to Africa's biggest film industry, it's no surprise that UAVs are pretty popular among filmmakers, media houses and individuals in Nigeria. However, as Deji Badmas reports, Nigeria's regulators have some pretty stringent conditions before UAVs can take flight.
Until 2015, you could just buy a drone and fly it almost anywhere you choose to in Nigeria without much of an issue. But with growing safety concerns and security threat, the Nigerian Civil Aviation Authority decided to issue what it calls regulations and implementation standards to guide the use of remotely piloted aircraft or unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs for short. You could simply call them drones. Now, the regulations prohibit any government agency, organization, or an individual from launching a drone in the Nigerian airspace for any purpose whatsoever without a permit from the NCAA or the Office of the National Security Advisor. Besides, flight plan must be submitted and approved by the NCAA prior to conducting the flight. Drones weighing more than 250 grams must be registered with the NCAA as well, and drone operators must obtain a remotely piloted aircraft system certificate prior to flying in Nigeria. All drone operators must be at least 16 years of age or older, and those with permits are required to follow very strict safety guidelines. For instance, permit holders are not allowed to fly their drones over people or large crowd. Drones are not allowed around the airport or where aircraft are operating. You can only fly drones in daylight and under good weather conditions. You must respect people's privacy, and flying of drones around government and military facilities are prohibited. So the rules are clearly spelled out, but then they are sometimes violated for lack of proper enforcement. Deji Badmas, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
The Union of Tunisian Businessmen and the government are calling for stronger cooperation between Tunis and Beijing for the reconstruction of Libya. The groups note that such cooperation has been of benefit in the continent and Libya should not be left out. Adnet Shawashi reports.
Samir Majoul, president of the Tunisian Confederation of Industry, Trade and Handicrafts (UTICA), declared that Libya's reconstruction and the opportunities for cooperation between Tunisia and China in this area were at the heart of a meeting held with a group of Chinese businessmen.
The reconstruction of Libya could benefit both Tunisian and Chinese investors and enterprises. Over $100 billion will be spent on the gigantic projects. Giant Chinese infrastructure Logistics, telecom and energy companies have the experience and the technology. Tunisians know Libya very well.
The first talks were held during the third Forum on China-Africa Cooperation held in September in Beijing.
The Forum on China-Africa Cooperation was a successful event. Now we notice its positive repercussions. Tunisia's strategic position in the Mediterranean area and the agreement signed with its European and African partners allow it to act as a link between China, Africa and Europe.
Authorities believe that the Belt and Road Initiative launched by China will strengthen economic cooperation between China, Tunisia and other African countries.
The establishment of Chinese industries in Tunisia, in partnership with Tunisian manufacturers, will open the doors of African and European markets, while ensuring an integration rate of no less than 40% in Tunisia.
Tunisian economists have welcomed the remarkable increase of Chinese trade, investment and financing flows in the African continent.
Experts in African affairs argue that a business climate offering investment incentives is one of the main conditions for attracting Chinese capital. In addition, Africa is attracting increased interest from investors, being the continent with the highest growth rates. Aden Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
Janet Ogana was trained as a lawyer, but she's causing ripples in the beauty industry in London. The Kenyan-born entrepreneur is carving a niche for herself by promoting products for women of color.
A Christmas pop-up store exclusively selling brands by women of color. It has opened its doors on London's busy Shoreditch High Street, just in time for the festive season. Founded in 2017, Janet's List is a brainchild of Kenyan-born entrepreneur Janet Ogana. She's a former barista but decided to venture into business.
I knew that one of the challenges for small independent businesses is getting into retail space. Now for women of color, when you add the intersectionality elements, the unconscious bias, that becomes even harder. There are additional hurdles. So I had this idea that it would be really fantastic to have a mainstream central London space where people could come in, buy from brands that they've only seen online, and discover lots of other brands as well by women of color. I think people are becoming a lot more intentional about where they spend their money, who they spend their money with, and they want to have a little bit of a story as well with the brands that they invest their money in.
From African fabrics, handmade jewelry, cosmetics, cards, and food products, customers are spoiled for choice.
We have color shot cards who do, just behind me, really interesting bags and mugs and coasters with strong images of women with head wraps. You know, that image I think is so familiar for a lot of people in Africa.
For Ogana, the store is not only about championing diversity, but also representing the rich and varied African diaspora living in the UK.
The one thing that I found for everyone who walks through the door, they want that story. They want to have the conversation. They want to go back to shopping like it used to be in the past. You know, not going to a supermarket and just putting things through the till. Actually coming in and having that sense of community and having that sense of discovery.
It makes sense because we want products we can relate to, and by someone who's selling them that we can relate to. There's just that trust there, and they know they have the hair, they have the problems we have, so I trust the brand.
The company also has an online store with curated products by brands that Ogana selected. She says that making her products easily available is not only good for her business, but offers a sense of belonging to her target market. Astatal, CGTN.
You're watching Africa Live. Coming up after the break. Long despised tattoos emerge from the shadows in Tunisia.
When you look at Africa, what do you really see? Do you see fast-growing, endless deserts and parched earth? Or do you see the biggest opportunity for an agricultural revolution in a generation? Do you see crowded, unplanned cities or vast, untapped markets? Do you see a population at risk Or do you see a billion-strong opportunity to grow the next wave of multi-billion-dollar firms in Africa? When you look at Africa, what do you really see? Join us in Global Business and see Africa through our eyes.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Continental, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
China has been celebrating its achievements at the 40th anniversary of reform and opening up. This has aroused an extensive response from various countries, among them South Africa. Cedric Froelich, the House Chairperson of the National Assembly of South Africa, says China has consistently pursued multilateralism and economic globalization and shared the fruits of this with the world for mutual benefit.
The significance of China opening up and moving into the new world order is the respect for multilateralism, and also realizing that as a single country you cannot claim to be doing very well while the rest of the world is not in good shape. The statement by President Xi Jinping recognized the importance of those in the world, those countries, those weak, those who are strong, to work together for the common humanity of the world and to entrench multilateralism, so that we can improve and address the issues of unemployment and also poverty and inequality that is ravaging the rest of the world. And the significance will be seen when we see the improvement in the living conditions of the poor. And China has an important leadership role to play there, and we fully support it.
Algeria and China are celebrating the 60th anniversary of the establishment of their diplomatic ties. A ceremony was held in the International Conference Center in Algiers. Algeria's Foreign Affairs Minister Abdelkader Messahel and the newly appointed Chinese ambassador to Algeria addressed the gathering. The North African nation issued a new postal stamp to mark this event. The stamp was crafted by Algerian artist Al-Meshta, and it portrays the massive contribution of Chinese workers in the development of Algeria. China is Algeria's largest trade supplier for the 5th year in a row. The two nations have achieved fruitful progress in bilateral ties.
China brought vital contribution to the Algerian Revolution of 1954 to 1966 to help it regain its independence. The unwavering support of China continued as it was the first country to recognize the provisional government of the Algerian Republic a few years after its proclamation of independence in September 1958.
This ceremony celebrates the strong and deep relationship between our two countries, and I'm honored to attend it, given that it's the first event for me here in Algeria since starting my duties as ambassador.
And associate beauty, others have even taken up courses at the first tattoo school in the Arab world. Take a look.
Tattoos are now emerging from the shadows in this northern African country. Young people are using body art as a form of beauty.
I wanted to get a tattoo for a long time, but it was quite difficult since I work. I asked my boss at work if I can get a tattoo. He advised me to put it in a hidden area if I was to get one.
Those with dreams of becoming tattoo artists haven't been left behind. They can now take courses in the country's first tattoo school.
The society associates those with tattoos with a person who has not succeeded in life. As a tattoo artist, I told myself, why not give a good image of the tattoo artist?
For this reason, it has been difficult for Fawez to set up a tattoo academy. He's a renowned tattoo artist who fought for the authorization and acceptance of the profession. He is a former engineer who entered the field in 2006.
It wasn't easy to get the authorizations, especially in Tunisia, where tattooing is not yet easily accepted. To get tattooed or to open a school is harder than you can imagine.
In this day and age, there are not so many female tattoo artists in the country. But this young lady hopes that the field will be full of women in the near future.
Mes amis m'encouragent, ils trouvent que c'est très encourageant.
My friends motivate me. They also find it very encouraging that I'm studying tattooing. It's a challenge that I face because there are not so many women in the field. Someone needs to be the first woman in the field, so why not me? Times are changing, so I think in a few years, in the near future, it will no longer be perceived as something wrong.
Currently, many tattoo artists in Tunisia work illegally without licenses from the authorities. They, however, hope that one day Tunisian society will embrace tattoos. Astatal, CGTN.
And coming up in sports, another star performance for Mohamed